On July 16th, The Hawk lands on Netflix. From the mind of Will Ferrell.
Oh, mama, I'm back!
Comes a new original series.
Get ready. That's it. Did I stutter?
When an iconic pro golfer
Lonnie,
Hawkeye!
takes one last swing at greatness,
you were a big shot golfer.
I still am a big shot golfer.
no one
Dad, I'm the Hawk now.
will stand in his way.
That's how it's done.
The Hawk, only on Netflix, July 16th.
This is going to be an extremely busy month. I have to watch 104 soccer games, follow the pregame, the postgame, yell useless opinions at the TV. It's a lot. So I knew that when it comes to screening for colon cancer, the choice was clear. The Cologuard Plus test. It can be used at home and can only take 15 minutes, so I can do it during halftime and not miss any action. If you are 45 or older and at average risk, ask your healthcare provider about screening for colon cancer with the Cologuard test. You can also request a prescription at Cologuard.com.
Need a laptop that's built to perform and designed to last all day? Select Windows 11 PCs starting at $499.99 are now at Best Buy. Learn more at bestbuy.com. Best Buy. Imagine that.
If there's one thing that the Carney government is focused on above and beyond, well, expanding trade internationally and building out Canada's economy, it seems to be regulating the internet. Hello, I'm Brian Lilly, and welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. This week, we take a look at Bill C-34. Its full name is An Act to Enact the Digital Safety Act and the Digital Safety Commission of Canada Act. Its, short form name would be the Social Media Act. But it's a lot more than just online harms and social media for kids, putting in a ban for those under 16. What is this act all about, and are there concerns about it? Joining us to talk about this is Emily Laidlaw. She is the Canada Research Chair and Cybersecurity Law Professor at the University of Calgary. Thanks for joining us, Ms. Laidlaw.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So let me ask you about this first off. There have been several attempts at putting forward this type of legislation. I won't use the legislative numbers, but it started with Stephen Guilbeault when he was Heritage Minister back in, I think, 2019, then there were, or perhaps a little bit later, and then Arif Virani when he was Justice Minister in 2024. Now Sean Fraser is Justice Minister. Why did it take so long to get to this point, and what were the issues with the previous versions? Because there was a lot of pushback, even among those who may have supported the Liberal Party or may have supported certain aspects. I know that I wrote about the first one saying that, look, there's a good part to this bill and a bad part to this bill. Why did it take so long to get to this point?
Yeah, I would say that Canada's behind on digital policy making. To give you an idea, the EU passed its first law on kind of this platform regulation back in 2000, and it's on its second version, and we still haven't passed.
Sorry, did you say 2000?
Yes, 2000.
That's 26 years ago.
I know. And I lived in the UK for about 10 years, pre-Brexit. And so I was quite surprised to come back to Canada and to find how far behind Canada really was. And so you mentioned at the beginning that there seems to be this push by the Liberal government to pass digital bills. And I would say, it's been a long time coming. It doesn't mean that any law will do. I think that we really have to dig into that. But the need to look at this space is particularly urgent. The government first introduced a paper with their proposal in 2021, and it was widely criticized, including by me. And that was because it was really focused on regulating content online and pushing for 24-hour takedowns. It was modeled on a German law at that time called NetzDG. But then an election happened. And to their credit, they did take the feedback and they started anew. And they started a process of wide consultation. So I would say, in contrast to some of the other digital bills that have been introduced, this particular one has been consulted extensively. I would co-chair the expert group to the government. There were citizens' assemblies, youth assemblies, consultations across Canada that culminated in Bill C-63. But as you mentioned, there was a lot of controversy about that bill. 90% of the bill was about this online harms of regulating social media platforms. Most of that was not controversial. So the big pushback was the fact that they decided to make it an omnibus bill and tack on amendments to the criminal code, reintroducing the Human Rights Act. And that is where most of the controversy was. And of course, Parliament was prorogued in January 2025, and that bill died. So this is kind of the second bill, Bill C-34. It is the third effort, and it is, unlike the predecessor, it just reintroduces platform regulation.
So there's no attempt, as previously you mentioned the Canadian Human Rights Act, and a long time ago, many of us fought a provision that was in there that allowed, we basically said it was the hurt feelings regulation, that someone could complain to the Canadian Human Rights Commission and get a judgment, a financial judgment against someone because they felt that they'd said something that was um, harmful to their feelings. Not wrong. Mark Stein famously went through all of that. There was a big push that was gotten rid of. There was an attempt to bring that back in the previous version, wasn't there?
There was an attempt to bring it back and to keep it more focused, though. So some of the provisions in it were really tailored to trying to limit the kind of frivolous and vexatious complaints that that you're speaking to, and but there wasn't popular support for it, and I find that I'm in rooms where it's really mixed. I also teach an anti-hate course at the University of Ottawa where we study this, and the students are really mixed. We dig into freedom of expression law, and so that one is just, I see no indications of that being reintroduced by the government.
I still laugh at one of the reasons that Mark Stein was, for his piece of Maclean's, was cited as pushing hate was he made a joke about Islam. He said, "Is it just me or does Ramadan seem to come around earlier and earlier every year?" Well, that only is funny if you know anything about Islam, and Ramadan comes around about every 11 and a half months. So yes, it comes around earlier every year because it's not a 12-month holiday. It moves. And that was used back 20 odd years ago to say, well, you're promoting hatred. I'm glad that they're not going that way. But do you feel that in the current situation, that have they struck the right note, or are they going too far? And and I'll use one of your expressions that I love. Um, are they still protecting lawful but awful expression?
Yeah, and that is the big question: is the lawful but awful, right? So I will say this, and if you'll indulge me, maybe I'll explain how the law works a little bit. Um,
Sure.
the new law strikes the right balance. Let me put aside the social media ban because I think we have to have a separate conversation about that. The gold standard now is this idea that these enormous, incredibly influential businesses, these big tech companies, should have consumer protection responsibilities, and that they should be mitigating the risks of harm, right? That essentially there is a business model here that can cause harm, and they should be regulated. At the moment, there is very little regulation of what they do. So in a way, this is,
Explain
yeah.
what kinds of harms, though.
So there's two types of harms that I think are a real focus. One is the business model itself. So these social media is essentially designed to be like the sticky design features, right? If you're looking at the algorithms that are pushing certain repetitive content, we're seeing with kids pushing of self-harm content, pushing of eating disorder content, and sticky design features that keep people on those spaces. I mean, we talk about dopamine hits, right? It's rewards, it's gaming, it's encouragement of things like chat streaks, all these design features that are to keep you there. They're a business. They're there to make money, right? They're going to design it that way.
And so, if I
Yeah.
can speak to that for just a moment, I've been
Sure.
on social media since Facebook started, since Twitter started. As a journalist, I use it to send out my material. And as the algorithms change, and they change on a regular basis, multiple times a year, there will be shifts. I can see that my content, people are clicking on it less. Now, on Facebook, they can't click through on anything related to, say, my columns at the Toronto Sun. But on X or elsewhere, it will go up and down. because
Mhm.
they don't want you to click through to a link. They want you to stay there. And so they feed you material that will keep you on their platform. That's what you mean when you're talking about the sticky content. Now, I want people to go to my material on my website. They want to keep you there. And so they're going to feed you things that will give you that dopamine hit.
It's the dopamine hit, but it's also um, likes and angry emotions and putting in little rewards that if you keep using something, you might achieve a certain level and get some sort of gift, right? And there's a lot of gaming involved, particularly for kids. And it's those, so it's how they design these spaces. It's basically this is the business that they're in. This is how they keep people using their products so that they make money. That's fine. It's just it's a consumer protection question about is leaving it to the companies to make decisions about how to craft that, protecting consumers, or does that there need to be legal intervention to put in place certain base business standards? And that is what this type of law, at least on a whole, targets. The other thing is that there's some extraordinary harm that we've seen that's flown from them. And this act targets social media and chatbots. So we can talk about chatbots in a bit. But it is this. And let me talk about kids, although it's not just about kids. Um, what we're seeing is that increasingly as kids are using these spaces, we're seeing a huge increase in exposure to essentially strangers that are exploiting these spaces for criminal ends, whether it's grooming and luring kids, and then threatening them and sextorting them. And oftentimes they're connecting with them in real life. We have some horrific instances where, a kid was lured through Spotify and then kidnapped. We are seeing extremism play out in these spaces. For example, they'll often befriend these children and then they'll get them to do certain things and then they'll threaten them with it. And they become basically drawn into an organized crime racket that is for extremism purposes. And this is real and this is happening on the front end. And we are seeing a huge proliferation of child sexual abuse images, intimate image abuse of children and adults. The adults for the intimate images. And now the creation of AI generated synthetic images. So there's a lot going on there, right? At the moment, there's most of the laws focus rightfully on the wrongdoer. Of course, you can't find them half the time. And you're also looking at quick ways that the spaces and the platforms that are these gatekeepers in the middle should maybe have business obligations to try to handle these particular harms. And that's what the legislation is aimed at. Of course, the lawful but awful that you mentioned, that is that key in-between space, which is when are platforms overreaching and being forced to over-regulate sort of the day-to-day conversations that might be offensive, that might be hateful, but don't rise to the level of being something that would be criminal or otherwise unlawful. I will say that the legislation intentionally does not, for the most part, target that. And we can dig into some of that if you want.
Well, so look, we've heard about incidents of young people, kids harming themselves for many years. I think back to the Amanda Todd case, and that has to be 15 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, 2013. Yeah.
2013. Okay, so about 13 years ago then. But how common is this? Because, you know, you have to wonder, okay, what is the are we attacking a small problem with a sledgehammer? Are we in a moral panic over something that is rarely happening? And, look, I've dealt with this with the issue of human trafficking. For years, I've talked about this issue, and people have told me it's not real. It's not happening. My own media colleagues have said it's not real, and yet I'm talking to police officers, I'm talking to social agencies that deal with it, and it is happening in large numbers. So, is what you're talking about the negative harms, the children being groomed, whether sexually or for organized crime? Is that a common thing? I mean, I'm not saying like 1 out of 3 kids or anything like that, but, is it a very small group, or is it bigger than most of us can imagine?
It is, I mean, that's a hard question to answer. I would say, like all crimes, most people don't murder, but it's still a crime, right?
Mhm.
So it is not happening to most kids, but it is happening to more than we think. And I think that there's a tendency to view it as, and I have these conversations all the time, which is, oh, but my kids are fine. They're okay. They're not, into anything problematic. And I think all kids are at risk. Some are more at risk. I think marginalized youth in particular are more at risk to this kind of extortion. But the number of stories about kids who are not marginalized that have faced this situation, I think the question we have to ask is a bit different. And it is this a whole of society problem? And should there be certain safety measures? And safety measures don't mean always content removal, right? So it might be, hey, your kid is on this space, and maybe if you figure out who the kids are, you shouldn't allow them to live stream or have private chats, because we know that some of those private chats are where this grooming takes place. Or it might be things like we should have more curated algorithms so it's safer for children.
So,
And
what does
yeah,
the legislation do to deal with this, though? I mean,
yeah,
we'll talk about the social media ban in a moment, but beyond that, kids are going to end up, or they'll be 15 one day and 16 the next, and then they can go on. So, what does the what does the legislation do to change algorithms or to alter what people can see, without blocking me from being able to see the content that I want that is lawful and hopefully not awful?
yeah, precisely. And so, uh, the this type of legislation, I say it's this type because we're seeing something similar in, for example, Europe, which is it takes a scalpel approach, and you create a regulator that's acting in the public interest. And the regulator in the case of Canada would only have the power to order content removal when it's child sexual abuse and intimate images. So stuff that we'd all agree should be taken down. Um, and for the rest of it, for things like fomenting hatred, inciting terrorism, and all the child protection areas, companies need to put in place risk mitigation measures, and they need to be transparent about it. It basically is you need to lift the lid on the business model of these companies. And it's not about individual pieces of content. It is about what safety measures do you put in place? What are your content moderation practices? How do you handle complaints? Um, how often are you reporting to law enforcement, and what does that look like? What are your practices there? So it's a series of safety steps that are sort of the packaging that is the foundation of safety, more so than individual pieces of content. And they have to be transparent about it to the regulator. And if there is a basis to investigate basically a systemic failure by the company, the regulator could investigate that company.
The social media ban. Um, is that going to work? Kids are devious little creatures. Uh, some people might, be taken aback at me saying that. But if you've had kids, you know that if they really want something, they're going to figure out how to try and get it. You may, give them wise counsel as to why it's not good or what have you. But, Australia's banned social media. And I know some people say it's been a great success. Other analyses say, no, it's actually not working, and most kids are still on social media. So, is the social media ban an effective tool or window dressing for the government? Because people are concerned. One of my own colleagues says, look, I have a hard time keeping my kids off social media because, well, every other kid is on it. But if the government says you can't do it, then I can say, okay, the government's my backup. I can see both arguments. What's the reality though? Will a social media ban be effective if Australia's hasn't, according to some?
Yeah, and the Australia ban, it's early days. It's been in effect for 6 months. I think most of the data is showing that, I mean, a study came out yesterday saying over 80% of kids are still using social media. So we don't know necessarily why that is. Um, it So I think we still need time to assess it. It could be that the companies are aggressively mediocre in their compliance, and so it indicates it's not working very well. But I think that the other is it's not age gating the entire internet. It's saying you can't register accounts with large platforms. Well, what's that going to do? That's going to incentivize kids to go to smaller platforms that are maybe less regulated and even more dangerous. So I would say social media bans as a tool, they are not the thing that are going to keep kids safe. What's going to keep them safe is requiring companies to put in place safety standards, consumer protection standards, and holding them accountable. The complication with social media bans would be that it's pretty popular. So as a policy measure, there's a lot of support for it. The other is, I think, long term, it could create a false sense of safety. That's my worry. That it's a false sense that you ban it. That means that once they're onto these sites, they're automatically safe, and that's not necessarily the case, or that they work, and so your kids are kept safe. But we know kids are devious; they get around it. I got my hands on alcohol before I was of age, like many did as teenagers. I
No.
know.
No, that never
Um,
happens.
yes, this is our confession podcast, and so so my worry with the ban is that it's going to create a false sense of safety. What it could do, though, is precisely what your friend mentioned, which is it prompts a culture shift. So not necessarily the kids that already have accounts now are going to try to get around it, but like the 7-year-olds and the 8-year-olds, where it's just not accepted culturally to use social media until you're 16. Let me add a wrinkle to this. Canada's proposal is a middle path. It doesn't actually propose a ban. What they're proposing is what I would call a pause, which is it's very in between an approach. It says if you're a large social media provider, you're one of the ones we regulate, you don't get to access the market that is children until you prove to us that you have safety standards in place. And if you want to apply for an exemption, you can. And if you prove that you're safe, we will allow you to be available to children under 16. Most TikToks and Instagrams of the world say you have to be 13 to use their sites anyway. So, I mean, telling them to enforce their own terms and conditions, I have no issue with. So we're really talking about 13 to 15-year-olds here. So in a way, we have to look at it and say, okay, is this actually a way to hold the companies accountable to say, no, prove you're safe, then you can access that market.
How much of this is parental responsibility?
Yeah, parental responsibility is always going to be a key part of this. I mean, we see that with the ban because if they allow their kids to use their accounts or help them, circumvent it, that's an issue. At this stage, though, social media and just big tech in general, this is so far beyond parents. This is a whole of society problem. This is a massive kind of corporate industry that hasn't really had that much regulation. And so this is a way to address that and fill that gap. There's always an important role to play for parents, but I do receive that response sometimes saying, oh, parents should just do a better job at parenting and be involved. And it's like there's nothing that they could do, though, to keep their kids safe and make these better spaces for their children beyond a few key steps, and that's not even going to go far enough.
And, well, we need to take a break, but when we come back, I will ask you, do we as adults even know the platforms that the kids are on? Because, we're talking about Facebook. Well, kids aren't on Facebook. We're talking about Instagram. Facebook is for the olds. Instagram is for the middles. Yeah, I mean, in probably a lot of them are looking at TikTok and saying, "Oh, that's for old people." Now, there are so many different platforms that I think people just don't realize. So we'll talk about that in a moment when we come back. We've got merch. Before we break, I want to tell you about this. We've got merch from hoodies to hats to tote bags and more, and you can find it all. Shop for your official gear, whether it's National Post, Toronto Sun, your favorite Post media brand. It's a bold way to show your love for the fearless journalism, and it looks good too. I'm just looking right now at the Toronto Sun ball cap. It says Toronto Sun, established 1971, a great year because that's when I was established. Visit postmedia.store to shop the collection today.
When it's time to scale your business, it's time for Shopify. Get everything you need to grow the way you want, like all the way. Stack more sales with the best converting checkout on the planet. Track your cha-chings from every channel, right in one spot. And turn real-time reporting into big-time opportunities. Take your business to a whole new level. Switch to Shopify. Start your free trial today.
El martes 7 de julio, la espera termina. Operación Triunfo llega a Telemundo. Miles respondieron al llamado.
Este es mi destino.
Pero solo unos pocos llegarán a la Gala Cero.
Aquí todo el mundo está ready. Aquí hay nivel.
¿Quiénes serán los elegidos?
Me voy a ganar mi lugar en la Gala Cero.
Descúbrelo en el gran estreno de Operación Triunfo Estados Unidos. Martes 7 de julio por Telemundo y Peacock.
Want to elevate your travel experience? Here's how. With a Delta SkyMiles Reserve American Express card, you can relax before your flight in the Delta Sky Club with up to 15 visits per medallion year. And now through July 15th, 2026, you can earn up to 125,000 bonus miles, so you're closer to your next adventure. The Delta SkyMiles Reserve card. Check out the new design at www.delta.com/Spotify. Minimum spending requirements and terms apply.
You're a political junkie, right? I mean, that's why you're listening to this podcast.
But if you're not in the loop with Postmedia's VIP political hack, then you're not getting even close to the whole politics story.
I'm Stuart Thompson, Parliamentary Bureau Chief.
And I'm political analyst Tasha Carradine.
We head up the team that brings Political Hack members the exclusive political intel that goes so much deeper than the news. With inside stories, sharp analysis, and behind-the-scenes scoops from Parliament Hill and beyond.
With our twice-weekly newsletters, exclusive reports from Washington, D.C., early access to John Ivison columns, and subscriber-only videos and events, Hack members get insider insight into the minds of the strategists, policy gurus, and power brokers shaping Canada's political future.
You don't want to miss all that, do you?
I sure don't. And you can get all now for less than $1 a week. Just go to nationalpost.com/newsletters to sign up.
That's nationalpost.com/newsletters.
So much is happening in politics right now. Rising tensions with the U.S. on trade and defense.
Not one, but two provincial separatist movements gaining real ground.
The Liberals trying to hang on to a razor-thin majority as the economy stumbles and with the cost of living still rising.
It's exciting.
Extremely exciting.
But the only way to get behind the scenes and right into the source code of what politicians and the people around them are really thinking is to get Political Hack.
Go to nationalpost.com/newsletters.
And join us.
Emily, you probably know a lot more about these platforms than I do because this is what you study. I know about the platforms that I'm on due to my work, and I may not be on any of them if it wasn't for my work, but Facebook, LinkedIn, X, TikTok for a bit. I checked out Snapchat, didn't see a use for it for my business, so I'm not on Snapchat. But even that is different than it was. It's 10 years old now, so the kids are onto something new. You've got Roblox, you've got Discord, you've got all these places that people congregate. Are we even focusing on all of the different platforms? Do we understand? Do the adults in the room that are saying, "Hold on, we gotta figure this out"? Do they even fully understand all the different platforms? Because it seems like, not to sound like an old school guy talking about kids in their rock and roll orchestras, but it's not. It's like we can't even keep up with all the different platforms.
Well, no, we can't. And I work in this area and I'm constantly learning about new platforms that I didn't know about. And I think that that's one of the challenges. And so let me frame it in a different way, which is how do you write laws about this then? Our expert group constantly had conversations about how do you keep this practical? How do you build out a regulator that's just appropriate but doesn't take on the world? How do you write a law that's flexible for the future and the evolving threat landscape? I mean, when we first all met in 2022, we were having zero conversations about chatbots. And now that's a major source of tech facilitated harm, right? So one of the things that you have to do is figure out who you're aiming at. The legislation targets large platforms. So a lot of these smaller, newer ones that are coming up that kids might get on would not be regulated by this, except if the government designated them, or the regulator at least, as of a significant risk of harm.
The two that I just mentioned, Roblox and Discord, I mean, my kids who are now grown and young adults, I mean, they're on Discord playing games. You hear about Discord showing up occasionally in criminal investigations. I would hope something like that might be included in the legislation. Roblox.
They're not.
They're not.
Yes, and so
so when I see my nephews or my niece, this is where they are at, and they're young, and they're you know, we might just view it as playing games, and yet they're talking to their friends on it. It becomes a social media channel.
Yes. And so there's a few ways to think about this. If you're trying to be practical and you are standing up a new regulator, you've got to keep it narrow. And so in that spirit, they really kept focused on large platforms and ones where you can communicate to the world at large. Like you get on Instagram, you get on X, and it's capable of communicating to the world at large. If it's not capable of that, all Discord servers have a max. They have a cap. Roblox, you're not talking to the world at large. It's a game, and games are excluded in this. Private messaging like Snapchat, the private messages back and forth, all of that is currently excluded. The way that they dealt with that was to create a category called online services. And basically, in the future, you could add different types of technology as the regulator's ready, as you see that there's a significant risk in those areas. And that they, when it comes to kids, the governor and council could add it. So it wouldn't be going through parliament and debated. I give you all this detail because choices have to be made. I look at it and I think some were very disappointed, and I wanted to see gaming added to that space. Criticisms are, though, you don't want to include all gaming. Not all games are a threat. We're really talking about things like Roblox. I would like to have seen something like Discord included, but how do you figure out the caps on something like that? So these are choices, and they're hard ones, and I think that people should have strong views and express them about what the government should be doing with these decisions that they made.
The ability to communicate in games is far and above what it was for my kids when they were young and playing on Club Penguin, which, by the way, great Canadian company that got sold and then got shut down. But it was a fun game while it lasted. And so I'm surprised that they didn't go in that way. But there are critics, such as the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. I want to read off to you part of what the preamble to their petition asking the government to stop Bill C-34, which hasn't passed. There's a whole bunch of bills that did pass at the last minute. Many of them relate to online issues. Bill C-34, not one of them, still at first reading. But the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms has a petition that reads, Bill C-34 will violate the privacy of all Canadians, undermine parental authority, damage freedom of expression and access to information, and grant the federal cabinet broad authority to regulate the internet in the future. While Bill C-34 has noble aims such as protecting children from online harms, this legislation threatens the civil liberties of all Canadians. So if you were sitting across from John Carpe or the folks from the JCCF, what would you say in response to them?
I will say, I mean, and I come at this as someone who's been a free expression scholar for a long time. I think that they're wrong. I think that there are some important questions that they're asking, though. The setup of the regulator itself and the appointment of the commissioners is pretty typical for a regulator. It's the same as the Competition Bureau, for example. So the CRTC is the same. So it is independent. If we want to push for something even more independent from government, yeah, absolutely. That should be something that's advocated for. I don't see how it undermines parents rather than reinforcing it. And I know that that's an argument that has been made that we should just leave this to parents and it's undermining parental choice. One avenue for something like the ban is to say parents should be able to um, uh, provide permission for the kids to be able to use these spaces. So that is one option. I will say most feedback from parents had been, dear God, no, don't like ban it, but then put it on me that I'm still the one having to navigate it,
Don't
right?
make
That
me the heavy.
don't make me have to deal with this some more. Also, if you actually read carefully the legislation, it provides a lot of user empowerment tools. It's more about providing tools to be able to block users. And so it's actually trying to help them navigate this space. It isn't a lot about content regulation as much as one would think, right? Although I think we should have important conversations. Like, should they have taken on hate? I absolutely think that they should. There's always the devil in the details about, how you look at the gray areas of offensive expression that isn't actually illegal. They have raised the point about privacy, though, and let's talk about that because for social media bans to work, they need to use age verification. And that's the privacy argument, that it forces social media platforms to put in place some mechanism to figure out who the kids are so that they can then ban them, or including age verify them to ensure they're not accessing pornographic material. So there are really important privacy and cybersecurity questions about age assurance. The bill itself doesn't specify the method of age assurance, but it does require that the companies put in place best practices that protect privacy and cybersecurity. I think many of the arguments out there see all age verification as just a non-starter. It's an automatic privacy invasion and it's no-go zone. I don't agree. I think that there's a lot of developments with age assurance. I think there's a risk. So the risk is that a company puts in place sloppy solutions, collects our IDs, knows who everyone is. It makes it vulnerable to hacking. We've already seen that hacking happen. But in practice, there's a lot more trade-offs here. There are a lot of choices.
So how would you do age verification, though?
Yeah.
So, I mean, so that if whether it's saying kids under 16 can't go on Instagram, or we need age verification for a pornography site. I mean, do you have to scan your driver's license? Or if you're under 16, you don't have one. Do you have to scan your ID in to visit these sites? And if so, that would be a privacy concern. I mean, where does that data go? And is it vulnerable to hackers?
I mean, so you're not required to implement collection of ID. That is one method. It's the clearest method to actually verify who someone is. The question is what a company does with it. So do they keep that data? They shouldn't be keeping that data once they have verified who somebody is. And so that's what makes it vulnerable to hacking. Now, I'm not saying I'm for that approach or for all forms of age verification.
But I mean,
but
C22
here,
might require them to keep some of that.
yes.
It's
And I
something
mean,
I hadn't thought of until now.
Well, and that's a really good question. I actually don't know the answer to that one because I haven't thought through the connections between Bill C-22 and these companies. I would say that for the most part that wouldn't be required because the act itself actually requires data minimization and best practices developed through the Privacy Commissioner. I'd also say all around the world, they're pushing for age-appropriate design for kids. Well, to do that, you need to know who kids are. So the money question in the next 5 years is figuring out who kids are. But let me give you examples of other ways that age assurance works. I've had a Facebook account since 2007, so I'm over 16. They might look at your Gmail account and be like, oh, you've had that for 20-odd years. Okay, so you're definitely over 16. Now, the less reliable measures are kind of age estimating, where they look at the faces of the kids and the behaviors of the kids, and they're like, I guess that you're 12 because you look 12. You've just announced that you graduated elementary school, and you're like, TikTok video, fairly certain you're not supposed to be on here. That's less reliable. And so Australia's implemented a waterfall approach to say, there's different tiers, and you have to think of them as kind of different reliability and different privacy risks. So it is not automatic that this is a privacy invasion. It's about doing it the right way. We don't want to age gate the entire internet, but if we're ever going to talk about an age-appropriate space for kids without cleansing the whole internet for all adults, we're going to have to start thinking about figuring out who those kids are, and a lot of people are working on trying to do this in a privacy and cybersecure way.
Yeah, and it just the collection of data is so far advanced from where it was years ago, and I remember trying to set up my kids with emails so they wanted to be able to send emails to grandma and grandpa and to their cousins when they were little. And this tells you how long ago it was because we were trying to set it up on Yahoo. And they wouldn't let kids have it back then. But Yahoo, of course, wasn't set up on the social media algorithm of trying to keep you there with sticky content and trying to feed you in a loop. It was a very different internet back then. I I, I honestly don't know what the answer is there. Let me read to you. So I read to you what the JCCF said from the right. Now, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association from the left is also critical of this bill. And Howard Sapers writes, Bill C-34 introduces obligations which are so alarmingly broad that providers of regulated services will be tempted to overcomply at the expense of users' freedom of expression and privacy rights. I can see that happening where companies just say, well, I don't know. So let's just err on the side of caution and we're going to take this approach. Is that a real concern?
Yeah, it's always been a concern in this space. And I'll say that law I mentioned from Europe back in 2000, their initial approach, and it is still law in Europe, is that these platforms have to, if they're notified that they're hosting any illegal content, they have to take it down or they risk liability. And so that incentivizes companies to err on the side of caution and just start taking down anything, right? That looks vaguely illegal. That isn't the approach taken in this legislation, but I take heart what is being said about the free expression point. So the law says that leaves a lot to the regulator, and that's been criticized, right? I think it's the only way this is really going to work, but the commission, the Digital Safety Commission, will develop regulations and guidelines. They are required when they develop those to do so taking into account freedom of expression and privacy. So when they detail how companies go about compliance, they set out that they should be ways to balance out to ensure freedom of expression is met. One thing that can be strengthened in this law, and I have pushed for this for a while, was that the company should have obligations to part of their digital safety plans. This should be reporting on how they're respecting fundamental rights. This is part of the European law. I think it could be part of the Canadian law. So the regulator will be required to enforce it on the companies. The companies up front aren't necessarily required to take that into account. Throughout the legislation, there are comments saying you are not in any way required to disproportionately impact freedom of expression and how you comply with this. That might be viewed as too woolly. I think that it likely is the only approach that then kicks it to a regulator to detail, but you also have to have faith in the regulator to do so.
And I think that will depend on who's appointed. I was going to say my mileage when it comes to regulators does vary. And if you get someone who is overzealous, well, then, it could head in the wrong direction. This is just such a an area where you've got to tiptoe, really. And you mentioned you lived in Britain and for a decade, and they had laws going back to 2000. We've all seen the stories of people being arrested in Britain for social media posts that might fit your definition of lawful but awful. Does anything in this legislation go down that road? Because I mean, the direction that the UK has taken, and I'm not sure about other parts of Europe, of policing Facebook posts or Instagram posts. It's quite frightening. Do we have anything in this bill or other bills that the government has put forward recently that approach that zone?
No, the law in Canada bears very little resemblance to the UK besides the kind of core idea that companies should be responsible. So the UK law is much broader, and it takes on all kinds of illegal content, including some, I think, of the more controversial clauses about commenting on I don't remember the exact phrasing, but there is a clause about immigration, for example, which has become a hot button issue. And UK law, even before the Online Safety Act, they had all kinds of laws that were for kind of the olden days where poison pen letters were written that were repurposed for the digital age, that were used to essentially show up on someone's doorstep because of something that they posted on Facebook or X back in the day. And there are many instances of that. So that tradition in the UK about what I would say is at times overregulation of expression, that isn't in this law. So the law has focused on 7 categories of regulated content, and is for the most part, they reflect content that is criminal or criminal adjacent. I think where it departs is more for child protection or in the area of chatbots, kind of concerns about the companionship side of chatbots. So none of those other features you saw in the UK would happen here. And so if we take hate speech, which is one of, I think, the more challenging areas when you're talking about illegal versus lawful but awful content, there would be no obligation for this regulator or no power for the regulator to order content takedown. What it allows is for the regulator to investigate a company if it becomes obvious that at a systemic level they have not been handling content that foments hatred. So they can investigate companies for that, and I think they should. And I think some would be disappointed that there's no avenue to take down what might at times be very obvious criminal hate speech. But that is the way that the act is structured.
You mentioned chatbots, and there was a lot of discussion after the horrific incident in Tumbler Ridge, trying to lay blame on a specific chatbot, saying that, well, this is why the shooting happened. Again, I have to say, is this a moral panic? Because in that instance, we know that the perpetrator in that case had been in contact with police numerous times, had been sent to a mental health institution, social services were involved. And in the end, the government appeared to be blaming a chatbot in saying, well, they asked about this. Well, the person had clearly expressed similar sentiments to live humans, and we didn't act. And so are we looking to make technology a scapegoat here? I'm not letting the AI company in question off the hook, but there were an awful lot of people before the chatbot was engaged that could have stepped in and said, oh, hold on a minute, we've got something bad happening here.
Yeah, and it's a great question. And I would say, I think of it as different entities have different types of responsibilities. So what do we know? We know that the perpetrator, she was posting concerning comments on ChatGPT. And so if we think anything is private about using ChatGPT, it's not, because those concerns then were flagged up to their trust and safety team. And based on their policy, they did not report it to law enforcement. And so that is a question of, should these companies report to law enforcement when they see concerns? I mean, they're allowed to. A lot of companies have in place policies about that. Was the threshold wrong? Clearly we know now in retrospect, this was a real danger. And if they could go back, they would have reported to law enforcement. But I think you can have obligations on the company and also have look at law enforcement's role that there were failures by different entities when how they handled this. Let me give you a different example, though. So it's not just Tumblr Ridge. If we look at companion chatbots like Character.ai, there was
These are people looking for friends or romantic relationships or what have you.
Yeah, and I will say I've tried out Character.ai on myself, right? I said I was 20 and I wanted to have a friend and wanted to flirt, and like suddenly you're getting pushed all these different sort of romantic exchanges. But for a 14-year-old boy, which was this case, it was a pretty horrific result. And the problem with the companionship becomes don't talk to your parents about that. Come meet me on the other side, essentially encouragement. And some of the problems with general chatbots like ChatGPT have been how-to guides of how to take your life and again encouraging individuals to not seek help from family. And so there is this interaction with the chatbot that is not a risk for most people, but is a risk in some instances. And so this is that question of safety standards. A lot of these companies are developing, putting a lot of work into these safeguards, but not all of them. So the question you have to ask is, are we okay just leaving it to the companies to decide for themselves how to address this? And I land on the side of no, because I have spent decades watching as they have implemented inconsistent safety measures and sometimes really lax commitment to trying to address this. And sometimes they just get slapped around no matter what they do, right? So I have some sympathy too. So I think that there needs to be some safety standards and safety safeguards for AI chatbots. What I'm really glad about is that they didn't ban them, because there was discussion about that. And I think you could perhaps consider companion bots, although I'm not for any ban for chatbots, but you absolutely could never have banned just access to general purpose AI like ChatGPT.
So, I'm glad that they're not trying to ban chatbots at all. So I don't use ChatGPT a bunch, but I use several others on a daily basis. It's, if you use it right, it can be a great tool for doing what you do in a day. Let me ask you about this. Have been several bills. Bill C-34, the one that we're talking about, um, I guess loosely it used to be called the Online Harms Act. Now it's called, I think this short title is the Safe Social Media Act. You've got Bill C-36, which deals with data and privacy. Bill C-9, to a degree, touches on social media posts in terms of hate speech and such. You've had the Online Streaming Act. There are so many different bills that this government has put forward or championed that touch on the internet. Are we in danger of over-regulating the internet? When you look at them cumulatively, are we headed in that direction?
I would say back in, when was this? 2018 or 19, the Liberal government had published their digital charter, which wasn't really a charter. It was just, these are the things that we want to address. And they didn't address all of those commitments, but it was a suite of reforms all about digital policy. I would say we 100% need to look at our laws to make changes to address the current issues that we're seeing. I think it is a fair question to ask whether each individual law is achieving the objectives or is going to have unintended consequences. And those are really important debates. I mean, some easy ones to my mind would be things like, I think it was Bill C-16, and I think that just received royal assent a few days ago, which adds deepfakes to the criminal code provision for intimate image abuse.
I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, that's an easy one, right? Far more controversial would be Bill C-22 and the questions about how long how long data should be retained, what kind of access should be provided for law enforcement. Is this really, requiring backdoor access or undermining encryption, or is it not? These are all really important debates, and I have been in rooms that seem to argue all kinds of different sides of that particular one. So I don't think that they're doing too much, but I think that each one needs to be interrogated closely, and then the determination is whether that individual piece of proposed legislation is just going too far or unnecessary. I mean, you never want to introduce a law that you don't need. Bill C-34, we need this one. It is, I teach my students basically a course about non-law because we have very little in this space. But other areas, I mean, you could ask yourself, okay, do we need some of these amendments when it comes to hate speech? Is the criminal code good as is? Is there something missing? Does this have unintended consequences?
Emily Laidlaw, Canada Research Chair in Cybersecurity Law at the University of Calgary. Thanks so much for the time, Emily.
Yeah, thank you.
Full Comment is a Postmedia podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Proulx, theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Make sure that you share this episode on social media. Yep, we've been talking about social media, but share it there and let your friends know about us. Hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
You're a political junkie, right? I mean, that's why you're listening to this podcast.
But if you're not in the loop with Postmedia's VIP political hack, then you're not getting even close to the whole politics story.
I'm Stuart Thompson, Parliamentary Bureau Chief.
And I'm political analyst Tasha Carradine.
We head up the team that brings political hack members the exclusive political intel that goes so much deeper than the news. With inside stories, sharp analysis, and behind-the-scenes scoops from Parliament Hill and beyond.
With our twice-weekly newsletters, exclusive reports from Washington, D.C., early access to John Iveson columns, and subscriber-only videos and events, hack members get insider insight into the minds of the strategists, policy gurus, and power brokers shaping Canada's political future.
You don't want to miss all that, do you?
I sure don't. And you can get all now for less than $1 a week. Just go to nationalpost.com/newsletters to sign up.
That's nationalpost.com/newsletters.
So much is happening in politics right now. Rising tensions with the U.S. on trade and defense.
Not one, but two provincial separatist movements gaining real ground.
The Liberals trying to hang on to a razor-thin majority as the economy stumbles and with the cost of living still rising.
It's exciting.
Extremely exciting.
But the only way to get behind the scenes and right into the source code of what politicians and the people around them are really thinking is to get political hack.
Go to nationalpost.com/newsletters.
And join us.